This is Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom, Chapter 29. Chapter 29 is After the Storm. The boops and booms had stopped and the lights were back on. Myron and the others had to step over all sorts of objects as they made their way back towards their classroom. The stairs were strewn with books, papers, cafeteria trays, musical instruments, an air pump, a giant stuffed walrus, and even the bust of Sigmund Freud. Between the 26th and 27th floors, the stairs were completely blocked off by Mr. Kidswatter's enormous desk. They all had fun climbing over it, including Mrs. Jules. Once back in class, Myron dropped Mrs. Zarg's fingernail into the bucket, which, unfortunately, was empty. Sadly, the other 999,999 clippings were gone. Myron would have written 1,000,000 on the blackboard anyway, but there was no blackboard. The chalk was there, however. It was as if everything in Wayside School had been shuffled like a deck of cards and dealt randomly to every floor. Mrs. Jules' blackboard was eventually discovered in the library. Fingernails and toenails would continue to be found for years to come, sometimes in very strange places. The sun shined, the sky was as blue as Allison's eyes. Birds chirped as they flew about. There had been no birds during the dark days of doom. Lewis, the yard teacher, shoveled snow off the roof. Among other things, the cloud had dumped huge amounts of snow. The playground sparkled white. Lewis had to be careful. The snow was packed high above the guardrails and was very slippery. "Look out below!" he shouted as he tossed a shovel of snow off the edge. Down below, the kids were playing a kind of reverse dodgeball. It was the boys against the girls. Every time Lewis shouted, "Look out below!" they did the opposite. Eric Evans charged past Jenny and dived face first, sliding in the snow-covered ground. Lewis clumped, smacked him right in the head. 1 point, they exclaimed. Recess was 3 hours today. The kids had been sent out to play while the teachers were stuck with cleaning up the mess made by the storm. Just as Mrs. Jules had predicted, now that the cloud of doom was gone, the world had become a happier place. The only thing missing was a rainbow. "Look out below!" Lewis called from the other side of the school. They raced around the building. Leslie dived towards the falling clump. 1 point, she declared. "No way, Miss Pigtails," said Terrence. "It missed you." "Did not," Leslie insisted. "See, look at the snow in my hair." "That's ground snow," argued Terrence. Dana came to Leslie's defense. "Some of it comes from the ground," she agreed, "but 4 flakes of it came from the air. I saw them." "How can you see 4 snowflakes?" asked Paul. "Super glasses," said Dana, pointing at her spectacles. She picked 4 snowflakes out of Leslie's hair. 1, 2, 3, 4, just like I told you. "That proves it," declared Bebe. 1 point. Paul scowled and remained skeptical of her spectacles. Up on the roof, Lewis spotted something sticking out of the snow. It was purple and green with some yellow dots. He tried to pull it free, but it was stuck. He pulled hard. It still wouldn't budge. He gave it one hard yank. The umbrella jerked free, but Lewis's feet slipped from under him. He fell on his bottom and slid backwards across the roof. "Look out below!" he shouted as he went over the edge. The children ran to the call. They were quite surprised when they looked up and saw the yard teacher coming towards them. Lewis looked down. He didn't want to hurt the children. He considered trying to marry Poppins, but he was holding the wrong end of the umbrella, and there wasn't time to change his grip and try and open it. His best chance was to grab the top of the flagpole. Wayside School had an extra tall flagpole, so you could see it next to the puny building. Lewis reached out but missed it. The next thing he knew, he was spinning wildly in circles. The curved handle of the umbrella had hooked the pole. Lewis whirled dizzily around it and slowly moving down the pole. By the time he reached the ground, he must have circled the flagpole more than 1,000 times, and Sherry ran to him. To Lewis, it looked like there were 6 Sherrys all spinning like tops. "Thank you, Lewis. You're the best," said Sherry, taking her umbrella. "But really, there's no big rush. You could have just used the stairs." Chapter 30 is called Rainbow. There was no stove in the cafeteria kitchen. The enormous pot hung from a thick chain above a blazing fire. "Lower the pot," ordered Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperadder turned the squeaky crank and the pot came down. "What will it be today?" he asked. "Shh," said Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperandre knew better. You must never interrupt a great artist during her moment of inspiration. Miss Mush's eyes were closed. She rubbed her chin. She wanted to make something truly special after the storm of doom. "Rainbow stew," she declared. She raised her wooden spoon high above her head. "Brilliant," agreed Mr. Pepperadder. "What do you think that's red?" said Miss Mush. Mr. Pepper looked over his inventory list. Red cabbage, he said, beets, strawberries, red peppers. Miss Mush waved the spoon and said, "Toss them in the pot." Flames shot up as Mr. Pepper threw in the ingredients. He had to shield his eyes from the smoke. "What about yellow?" asked Miss Mush. "Yellow squash, bananas, yellow peppers, yellow onions." "Start with the bananas," said Miss Mush. "And then we'll see about the onions." Mr. Pepper started to peel a banana, but Miss Mush stopped him. "The peel is part of the yellow," she reminded him. "If I wanted white, I would have asked for peeled bananas." "Sorry," said Mr. Pepper and he tossed 50 bushels of bananas, peels and all, into the pot. There was a loud hissing noise and steam filled the room. Some cooks considered things like taste or perhaps nutrition when preparing for a meal, but rainbow stew, color was all that mattered. Miss Mush stirred the pot with a large stick, perhaps a little black now for definition, she said. Mr. Pepper read from the list, "Poppy seeds, burnt toast, my shoes." High above them in Mrs. Jewell's class, several children held their nose. "What is that smell?" asked Calvin. "Miss Mush must be cooking something," said Bebe. "Smells like shoes," said Myron. DJ sniffed. "Black shoes," he said, "with hard soles and no laces." "You can smell the laces?" said Kathy. "No," said DJ, "I told you there weren't any laces." Mr. Kidswatter's voice came over the speaker. "Good morning, students. Is another great day here?" The loudspeaker was paper rustling. "Wayside School. For lunch today, Miss Mush will be serving rainbow stew. It will be the greatest lunch ever." 15 floors beneath them, Miss Mush felt her stomach tighten. She, too, heard Mr. Kidswatter's morning announcement, and now the pressure was on. She climbed a ladder and stared down into her bubbling pot. Her face was covered with soot and sweat. "Something orange," she decided. "How about oranges?" suggested Mr. Pepper "Too obvious," said Miss Mush. "Carrots?" "I suppose," said Miss Mush, although carrots didn't really feel right to her. Inspiration struck. 18 pumpkins, she exclaimed. Each pumpkin made a giant splash as Miss Mush and Mr. Pepper took turns tossing them into the pot. After all the pumpkins were added to the stew, a tiny smile crept across Miss Mush's face. It was a smile that all the great artists know well. After years of self-doubt, she started to believe she was on the verge of creating something truly wonderful. But it was just a quick smile and then back to work. The doubt always returns. The lunch bell kaboinked and the children descended upon the cafeteria. "Rainbow stew," said Benjamin. "It sounds too good." "Don't let the name fool you," warned Todd. "The better the name, the worse it tastes." "Remember when she made Midnight Madness?" said Paul. "Don't even say it," Leslie snapped. "I was up all night running around in circles." Miss Mush and Mr. Pepper stood shoulder to shoulder as the children lined up. They had finished the stew only moments before. "I hope they like it," Miss Mush whispered. "They will," Mr. Pepper assured her. He wore short pants, black socks, and no shoes. Miss Mush hoped he was right, but all her doubts had returned. Her apron was splotched with lots of bright colors, but the rainbow stew was lumpy, grayish-brown mud. She didn't understand it. What happened to all of the colors? Mauricia reached the front of the line. Miss Mush scooped some rainbow stew into a bowl and handed it to her. "Thank you, Miss Mush," said Mauricia, always polite. "Sorry, it was supposed to be a bit more colorful," explained Miss Mush. "I don't know what went wrong." Joy was next. "Sorry," Miss Mush said again as she handed a bowl to Joy. "Sorry, Ron," she said. "Sorry, Dee Dee. Sorry, Joe. Sorry, John. Sorry. Allison and Ronnie sat at one end of the long table. "Are you going to eat it?" Rodney asked Allison. "I have a tangerine in my pocket," said Allison. "Maybe I'll just eat that." Rodney watched Allison slowly remove the entire peel in one piece. Dee Dee counted the points on her fork. DJ swirled his plastic fork through the gray muck. "Well, here it goes," he announced. He poked his fork into something solid. It could have been a vegetable, or maybe meat, or perhaps a part of a shoe. He lowered his fork. "Maybe later," he said. "Looks delicious," Kathy said enthusiastically. She took a big spoonful, brought it to her mouth, and swallowed. "Yummy," she declared. The other kids couldn't be sure. They could never tell anymore when Kathy was speaking in opposites. Calvin stabbed something gooey with his fork. He brought it to his mouth, chewed a while, and then chewed some more. "Well?" asked Bebe. Calvin wasn't sure how to describe it. "Red?" he said at last. "Red?" questioned Allison. "That's a color, not a taste." "And blue?" said Calvin. Rodney took a bite. She chewed a while. "Purple," she declared. I taste yellow, said Todd. Dana swallowed. Pink, she exclaimed. John, finishing chewing, swallowed. Kind of blue-green, he said. It's delicious, said Sherry. Purple and green and yellow polka dots. The more they chewed, the more colors they tasted. That's silly, said Allison. She took a bite. Her eyes shone. She tasted orange with green and purple stripes and black outline. Do you like it? Said Rodney. Only the best lunch ever, said Allison. Mr. Pepper-Ratter grabbed and shook Mrs. Mush's arms. They like it, he said excitedly. Look at them, they really like it. Miss Mush didn't say a word. A tear rolled down her sweaty and sooty cheek. Did you write down the recipe? He asked. Miss Mush shook her head. There's no recipe, she whispered. No two rainbows are the same. She gazed out across the lunchroom. This was all she ever wanted. Everybody chewed. And that's the end.